Welcome to another episode of our very special series, Women in Politics, Independence Day. I'm Jaynie Morris and I'm your host of this exciting, very short series, but a very powerful series where each episode I am interviewing women who have decided to step up and take a seat at that decision-making table in Parliament, wherever they are, in state, federal, country, global politics worldwide. That's what this podcast is all about now, because we felt very strongly, both at Transforming Now Together as well as our sister company, Sheroes Unlimited, that if we don't step up ourselves and allow these incredible women who are courageous and making a difference have a platform, then how are we not contributing to change? So that's why we're here. It's fantastic to have your company once again, or if this is your very first time, welcome. I hope you enjoy. And don't forget, never miss an episode of any of our podcasts. Always subscribe. There's a subscribe button below where you're watching or listening to this podcast right now. Or of course, you can go to our website, jayniemorris.com. It's got all the details there. Anyway, today's episode, I've been really curious about our guests today because I'm not a political animal by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm not that knowledgeable on, territories and, electorates and things like that. And in my home country of Australia, I know that our capital is Canberra, but I didn't realise that Canberra actually, I thought Canberra sort of was separate to everything else in regards to politics. And for some reason, I thought because our parliament's there, they don't have candidates, they don't have representatives. I know it sounds weird, right? And I bet some of you are thinking, hey, Jaynie, I thought that as well. Well, let me tell you, Kim Rubenstein is my very special guest today, and she is standing in the next federal election, 2022, in Australia as Kim for Canberra. So I welcome you, Kim, and I'm excited for you to explain to me Canberra.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jaynie. And you're probably not, as you said, you're probably not the only person. And in fact, historically, it's not unusual for you to be confused, because when Australia was formed in 1901, there wasn't a Canberra. In fact, the capital of Australia, or the way it operated at the beginning, was in a sort of makeshift place. And in fact, it started in Melbourne, where they had the federal parliament operating from Melbourne. But in the process of deciding where the federal capital would be, there was rivalry between Melbourne and Sydney. And for those internationally, though, they're the two big, on the East Coast, they're the two big business centres. And that was where a lot of the politicking was being done about setting up a federal country, federal commonwealth. And so because they were so jealous of each other, the Constitution actually says that the national capital has to be at least 100 miles away from Sydney to be able to make sure that Melbourne didn't feel badly done by. And I've actually previously said, that is the telltale sign that there were no women sitting at the convention tables, because they would have said, how can you have your workplace at least 100 miles away from someone's home? But we might come back to that in terms of women in politics. But yes, the national capital was set up as Canberra. But at that time, you're right, it was a little section of New South Wales, at least 100 miles away from Sydney. But over time, it was set up as an internal territory. And there are two internal territories in Australia, the ACT, where Canberra is, and the Northern Territory. And it wasn't until 1975 that the territories had Senate representation. And I'm running for the Senate. So there've only been territory senators since 1975 in Australia.
Well, therein, thank you for clarifying that. And I don't feel so silly now. I do. That's a great clarification. And you are absolutely right. And we will touch on it as well in regards to women in politics, because you're right. If women were in that decision as making space, they would definitely have not said, yeah, put us 100 miles away from where I live.
Yeah.
So Kim, Let's, if you wouldn't mind, just
Sure.
sharing with my audience a little
Mm.
bit of background about Kim. Now, I know that you're a law professor,
Yes.
you're a citizenship expert, you're a
Mhm.
human rights advocate, you're a champion of equal opportunity and active citizenship. Fantastic, and we're going to, and huge respect and kudos for that. But
Thank
can
you.
you give our audience a little bit of a glimpse behind Kim
Yes.
Rubenstein so they get
Thank
to know you?
Yeah, thanks, Jaynie. Look, I've been obviously being asked this a lot now, but it's also something I've reflected on in terms of thinking my life's journey about all of those things, about being a law professor, of advocating for citizenship, of being a sort of human rights advocate. And I think a lot of it has to do with growing up as a sixth generation Australian Jewish person. I go back all the way to one of the first Jewish convicts, a fellow who was found, Henry Cohen, found guilty of being in possession of a stolen check or promissory note. Now, he said that he was not guilty, and there is still on the Old Bailey records his defence. But alas, the magistrate was not convinced, and he was sent out to Australia, and his wife and 10 children came out separately as free settlers. But I think that sort of aspect of growing up as part of mainstream Australia, but being part of the Jewish community, always gave me a sense of insider and outsider, perspective. And I went to a non-Jewish school, but I did all sort of Jewish activities outside of school. But I just think that aspect of identity was sort of crucial. And also, even though I'd grown up here, knowing about the Holocaust and knowing if I had been living in that part of the world at that time, that would have been me, impressed upon me the power of a state to do horrendous things. So those things, I think, the more I reflect on it, make sense in terms of me wanting to do things that were about membership and identity in my professional life, but also to advocate on behalf of people who are vulnerable. So all my pro bono legal work over the years has really been standing up against the state, protecting individuals against the power of the state. And then my writing and working about citizenship have also really been about membership and identity, and how the legal concept fits with our sort of broader notions of participation. And often they don't fit very well together. So trying to push government to be more inclusive about the way it thinks. So all of those things, I think, link back to my identity. And then the other aspect, which we'll probably get into more, is where gender fits into all of that. Growing up in an all-girls school, I always felt, and we were reaffirmed to feel, that we could do anything. And I really believe that gave me such a strong skill set from which I've moved forward. But as soon as you get into the working world, you see that is not as you think. And realizing the privilege of expectation and trying to change it so that the expectation actually plays out in practice, that's been a motivating force for me in all of my work as a teacher of students, in terms of advocating both men and women about gender equity, but also in terms of just all aspects of my thinking about citizenship and membership, always adding in, not necessarily always being a focus, but always being conscious of the place of gender in the way we live our lives and what impact that has. And that has a huge impact on a whole lot of policy. So that's a little bit about what motivates me, that my professional life really does actually link with my personal passions. And I've been very fortunate in terms of also having a very loving environment to grow up in, and also now having adult children who are very excited about me doing this. So family has been really key for me throughout. And I've got this opportunity at this point in my life to not sacrifice family, but in fact to incorporate family, and to think more about how we could make Parliament more family friendly, so that in future people like me don't have to wait till they're in their mid-50s to think that it's not going to be too much of a sacrifice. So there are a few things about me.
Are you a Canberran? Do you call it Canberran? Canberry?
Yeah, I think that's what we do. I say I'm a passionate Canberran. I moved to Canberra in 2006. So
Right.
after I'd worked for a few years in Melbourne as a lawyer, I went overseas and had the privilege of doing my postgraduate work over in the United States of America. So for those of you watching from the US, I had the privilege of studying at Harvard University. It was a fantastic experience. And it was where the world opened up to me in terms of thinking professionally that being an academic would be a perfect combination of all of the things that I love and I'm interested in. So when I came back from that experience, I went back to Melbourne and was a lecturer, and then progressed in the hierarchy of academia at the University of Melbourne for 13 years. And then I was encouraged to apply for a professorship at the Australian National University, which is here in Canberra, where I'm sitting, on Ngunnawal country, which I'd like to also acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders where I have the privilege of living now. And so I came up with my husband and then 7 and 5-year-old kids to Canberra without a clear sense of how long I would be here, although very privileged with an ongoing position. And we just fell in love with Canberra. It is such a wonderful place to live. So I am a passionate Canberran, and it is for here in the Canberra is in the Australian Capital Territory, and the Senate that I'm running for is for the whole of the territory, the Australian Capital Territory. And I will be very proud to represent the ACT if elected at the next election.
So let's talk about that then, Kim. By the way, I love your slogan, Kim for Canberra. I think it's very good. It's very catchy. It's good. So I have asked this question of my other guests, and I'm going to ask you as well, Kim, is that how can I put this? Politics, I call it an industry, but that's my personal thing, right?
Yeah.
Politics hasn't had, shall we say, the shiniest of looks in recent years. So it can be deemed as a bit of a, well, it has been portrayed, especially within the media at large, that it can be a scary, it can be a harsh, it can be downright dirty place to be. With all of those in mind, what was it that made you decide, no, I'm going to step up and I'm going to take a seat. I'm going to win this seat and take this seat in the Senate, the decision-making table for Australia? What was that moment?
Yes. So first of all those things you mentioned are in fact part of that impetus, part of that decision to say enough is enough. Politics does not have to be like this. And I've been working for 25 years in issues to do with accountability and transparency in government. I teach students about things like freedom of information legislation and the ways you challenge government legally in our courts and in tribunals. But I know that at the heart of it, that the underlying principle of our parliament is not to be so awful and dirty and industry-like. It's actually about active citizenship. That's what I've been really driven by in all of my professional life, of encouraging people to be active citizens. And as I've said to my students, the highest form of active citizenship actually is being a member of parliament to represent other citizens and to bring their voices into parliament. And I think the extent to which those awful factors that you just mentioned have amplified, particularly during COVID and particularly during this period where we've seen so much of society fragment, I just felt that the time was right for someone like me, with the privileges that I've had, to use those to change things, to sort of bring that skill set and knowledge set from the outside into Parliament. And because of the Senate, and, you know, for those who are in the US, it's a similar system with the lower house and the upper house. The Senate is a house of review, but also very importantly for in Australia at the next federal election, no matter who wins the lower house or makes up government, the half Senate election, which we have in all of the states, not in the territories, but in the states, means that half of the Senate will stay there. And so we know part of what the makeup of that Senate is, and we know for certain that no matter who wins government, they will not have a majority in the Senate. So my role as an independent could be key, because they'll need the votes of what we call a crossbench to pass any piece of legislation. So knowing that all the issues that I've been working on, I could actually bring something into Parliament to assist. And the third thing, Jaynie, is that within Australia, as no doubt your program is going to show, there has been a heightened awareness to the value add of independence into the system. Because what we've also seen, and part of that ugliness, has been that the parties have dominated too much of our system. And what I mean by that is also not that parties are inherently bad, but that the structures of the major parties in our system have become quite toxic, and that the factionalism and power frameworks within those have actually become hurdles to good policy development. It's not that there aren't good people in there. And in fact, I think independents like me and the others will help those people with higher drives of being in public service to actually assist them within the parties to do better. But I also think that people around Australia have seen the real benefits of having a few more independents to bring the diversity of views in. And I think once that happens, that also then helps with that notion of the awfulness of Parliament, because I certainly am committed to ensuring with that power that I would hold in the Senate to insist on respectful debate, to engage with the issues, not the people, and to really, really drill down on what is in the best policy outcome, what are the best policy outcomes for every single different issue. Not to have a bartering system where you say, I'll give you this if you give me that, but actually on each issue to truly engage with what the best outcome is. And having that opportunity, I just felt I would never forgive myself for not at least having a go.
I think it's interesting that you, how you've beautifully explained as far as the Senate and how it does work in regards to the two houses and what have you, because would you agree that most people, and we're talking about Australian politics now for my audience, most people in Australia wouldn't actually realise or aren't informed enough about how the Senate actually does work, and because is the Senate not really the gatekeeper for all legislation?
Yes, absolutely. So I think you're spot on both levels. First of all, even as a teacher at law school, when you have really great students coming in, it always amazes me when you teach a compulsory subject like constitutional law, like I did, how little some of those students knew about the basics of our system, of the fact that we have two houses of Parliament, that every piece of legislation has to go through both houses, and the different systems of voting. So part of the reason why the Senate has become such a gatekeeper is because it's a system of proportional representation. So more people have access to being elected because you need a certain percentage to get elected. And that broadens the diversity of life experience and parties and opportunities, like for someone like me as an independent, to have a go at really getting that percentage to get in. And as a result, it becomes, that's right, like a check on the lower house, that any government has to negotiate with a Senate. There have been a couple of examples in our history where the government of the day has had a majority in the Senate, but that has often come back to as a backlash on them, because they get so entitled and they pass through so much legislation that's not responsive enough to the needs of everybody, that they then lose very quickly at the next election. So it's a very healthy aspect of representative democracy to have a Senate. It was originally set up as a states house, so that, and you can see that in the disproportionate numbers of senators. So Tasmania, which is the same size as the ACT, has 12 senators to the 2 in the ACT, and each of the states have 12 senators, whereas the Northern Territory and the ACT only have 2. However, that's another whole discussion. But in essence,
maybe that can get changed down the future.
That'd be a big change because it's constitutional. But
of course.
Yes, but we could actually change the numbers of people for the ACT, and it's one of the things that I am campaigning about, that it's time for the Australian Capital Territory to have 4 senators rather than 2, because we've doubled in size since we started, and each of the states in that same period have gone from 10 to 12, whereas we didn't increase by 2. So I think it's time for the ACT to have 4 senators.
Absolutely. So Kim, let me ask you then, so you made the decision, you spoke to your family first.
Yes.
And then you made the decision, and then you went, right, okay, here we go. So you started before the official campaign trail actually started, as well. When you've been, so I'll refer, and I'll call it the campaign trail so that our audience knows where I'm leading this to. When you've been out on the campaign trail in Canberra,
Yeah.
what are the two most important things that people are saying to you that
Yes.
when you get elected,
Yes.
what they would like you to do for them, for
Yeah.
Canberra?
That's a really great question. And can I explain also in that campaign trail, I started last August because, as I mentioned to you in the Senate, one other factor that's relevant for people listening is that the Senate ballot paper where you vote, you've got two options. You can either vote above the line where the parties are listed or below the line where individuals' names are listed. And it gives everyone the preference to either follow a party framework in their head or to actually individually choose the numbers of senators that they have for that. And as an independent, if you're just running as an individual, you're below the line. But the reality is that in the ACT, for instance, 80% of people vote above the line. So it's such a big hurdle. So that's why I formed Kim for Canberra, to be above the line, to enable people to very easily vote for me. And when I did that, Jaynie, we were in lockdown. So I actually started off meeting with people over Zooms. As soon as people joined to be a member of my party, I invited them to invite up to 20 other people to come and meet me. And basically most weeknights, I was meeting at least once or twice in the evening with groups of people who had responded to my announcement that I wanted to have a go at this and were enthusiastic about it and brought other people along. And then more recently, I have been, as you said, out and about on the streets, outside supermarkets, talking to people at events that we've been organising. And there are a couple of really key issues that are both specific to Canberra, but I think national in their import. One is integrity in government. We've just seen so much disenchantment with the way our leaders have been exercising power and what appears to be abusing their power to either get themselves back into Parliament or to cater to particular interests in society that may not be in the best interests of everyone. The rortings of different entitlements. So integrity has been key. And one of those, one of the reforms that links to that is setting up an independent commission against corruption, which I'm saying that I would support. But in addition, I'm saying we need to revalue some of the institutional structures that are there that have been devalued. Things that I mentioned before, like freedom of information frameworks or tribunals to review government decisions. They're all sort of structures that were set in place to help keep government accountable in between elections, and they've all been run down in terms of funding, in terms of access to information. So in addition to an independent commission against corruption, I'll be advocating for strengthening those structures, which will mean that you probably don't have to get to the Independent Commission Against Corruption as much because the system is preventing people from doing the wrong thing before you even get there. So integrity is key. The other is undeniably climate change action. I mean, every day we're sitting here in Australia at the moment where there are floods on the East Coast that are just such extreme weather events that it is impossible to ignore the realities of the impact of climate change. We've had, the bushfires the year before. We are just, the IPCC report is just so clear that these are cascading events, that the more things happen, the worse things are getting. And we have to do something as a matter of urgency. Now, I'm committing to ensuring that our Parliament after the next election acts immediately on that. I've got a few policy things that I'm about to announce, but there is no question that's something that I'm committed to supporting Canberrans' absolute clear desire and demand for immediate action on climate change. So they're two. The other is women's safety. So there are things that are coming out all around Canberra. But the one thing that's specific to Canberra, which we mentioned earlier, is actually having better representation for Canberra in our federal parliament. So my idea of doubling the number of senators is about providing more people power to supporting people here in the ACT with 4 senators. But also there's this curious thing in our constitution which says that the federal government can choose to override any ACT government decision, which is, again, one of those quirks of our constitutional start. But what it has seen happen in Canberra and the ACT, which was very contentious, is that the ACT legislature, the more local legislature here, passed a piece of legislation called voluntary assisted dying. to enable people to make those decisions with lots of safeguards around it. And the federal government decided to override that and make that not a piece of legislation. And many Canberrans are very frustrated by that. And I'm advocating that I would assist in repealing that override so that that legislation could be reinstated or at least re-examined. But also, I think with 4 senators, you've got a greater chance of resisting any future attempt by a Commonwealth Parliament to override any legislation.
You touched on one area that I did want to speak with you about, and I know that we are on a time restriction here, so however, it's a very important issue, and everybody who follows me and knows me knows I've been a very vocal advocate for domestic abuse and homeless women over 50. As you would be well aware of, Kim, the fastest growing demographic in Australia, and recent research that I have read is also, it's a global as well, fastest growing demographic of homeless people is women over 50. So the changes in the last year or so to merging the federal courts and the family courts have been mixed with have been met with mixed conversation, shall we say? And what has been coming through is those conversations and those issues in and around that of if it was going to be merged have started to materialise as well, especially for women and men in domestic abuse, because let's not forget that they are also affected. As well. However, for the point of this conversation, we're talking about women over 50. Yes. So as a senator in Australian Parliament, yes, what will you be doing for women over 50 as far as protection is concerned in those areas?
Look, it's a really important question, Jaynie, and all strength to you too for bringing a focus on this. It is an undeniable reality, as you just said, and in fact, it's the structures of our economic frameworks that are largely underlying that reality in terms of homelessness coming from lack of financial wherewithal. So even just yesterday, a government decision against women being able to contribute to their super during childcare leave and something is an example of governments not taking seriously the impact of these aspects of women's lived experience into your financial planning and framework. So in the longer term, for women looking forward to those who become over 50, who would otherwise be vulnerable, changing those structures so that they don't get to the position of where what you're talking about is the now for so many women like you and me who are over 50. Well, I'm presuming that you're in the same bracket as me.
Oh yes, I'm way over 50.
So one of them is being forward-looking to protect against those women in the future being in the same scenario, recognizing that there is a reason for this and fixing that. That would be one thing that I would be really committed to. But the other is putting in place mechanisms for those women to get greater support. There's just, again, these are things that are straightforward and doable. It's just a commitment from a parliament to actually make it happen. And I think this comes back to the point that I alluded to earlier, which is that if you don't have in your parliament the lived experience of the diversity of Australian society, you're not going to have people being able to hear and respond to the advocacy that's done on their behalf. And I think what has been really key for me when I mentioned that the last 2 years of COVID have been sort of quite instrumental in me saying now is the time to put up my hand. Over the last 2 years during COVID, I was working and I'm on rec leave from this position at the moment at the 50/50 by 2030 Foundation at the University of Canberra. And when COVID hit in that role, we went and advocated to the COVID commission that was set up to deal with how we move forward post-COVID. We met with people from Treasury. We met from all different advocacy groups in terms of the childcare sector, and really were able to put forward to policymakers how important it was in their planning for post-COVID to truly take into account the lived experiences of women who were largely the ones bearing the load, in terms of the caring institutions, in the nursing industry, in the healthcare industry, the burdens and the responsibility that women were taking on board. And then in the home, when everyone moved home, who was juggling the childcare, the education at home? I mean, there's some men who did stand up, and it's helped them think about doing more in the home. But for the large majority, the gendered stereotypes in society also led to women having too much of that load. And all of that, not only the recognition of that, but seeing how the advocacy wasn't enough from the outside. You actually need the people on the inside to be making the changes, is really what motivated me to put up my hand now. And I'm committed to those changes around gender issues in society, which I believe are not going to only benefit women, but are really going to truly benefit men. And that's another whole discussion in itself, Jaynie. But I think for society as a whole, we're going to see a healthier society if we achieve gender equity on those terms.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Before I let you go, and it's been my absolute delight to have you on our podcast series, Kim. Before I let you go, I have to ask you the question I ask all my guests. Yeah. If you had an 8-year-old Kim in front of you right now, what advice would you give to her?
I would say to her, always look on the positives, look towards the positives in any situation. That in any situation where a door closes on you, just know that another door will open. And to maintain a sense of balance. Life is a mix of ups and downs, but to try and maintain that sort of even temperament, to absorb the scenarios around you, use your internal energy to keep going forward, and truly believe in yourself.
That's great advice. And I think you already told yourself that when you were 8, because as you were saying all of that, I was thinking, that's Kim as well. Kim, thank you very much for being on Women in Politics Independence Day, our very special podcast series. And if anybody wants to contact you, find out your policies, find out what you're doing, yes. Your website would be the best?
It is. It's Kim for Canberra. It's very easy. www.kim4 all one word.com.au. Have a look around the website. There's easy ways of contacting me through that website. If you're in a financial position to support an independent person running forward, push the donate button, all those things, anything, but just your interest, your active citizenship is all that I'm really encouraging all Australians to activate for this coming election.
That's absolutely fantastic. And Kim, after you are elected, I know you're going to be incredibly busy. However, I'm going to extend the invitation now, so I've got it on record. I would like to have you back on another podcast series after you're in, so we can find out how you found it all, but also what you're doing next. So I do extend that invitation to you now.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope I am in that position to take up that invitation. But anytime, Jaynie, thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing for women and men around the country.
Oh, you are more than welcome. Well, thank you, Kim Rubenstein, independent in Canberra, Kim for Canberra. .com.au, you said, didn't you? And for wherever you're listening or watching this podcast right now, all of the contact details for Kim are below where you're getting this podcast right now. And also in the latest issue of our sister company, Sheroes Unlimited, the latest issue of our SU magazine features many of the independent women that are running for election in their local communities, including Kim. So if you'd like to read more about her story, make sure you get it. You can get that. That issue is for free. So go to sheroesunlimited.com, the website, to get that. And look, just remember to subscribe so that you never miss out on any of our podcasts. If you've got a comment or you've got something, a question or anything in regards to this podcast, drop it in the comments section below. And of course, like and share. Spread the word of what we're doing as far as Women in Politics Independence Day podcast series is concerned, because the more people that know about these incredibly amazing women and what they're doing, they're stepping up to get a seat at the decision-making table of their governments in Senate, local, state, federal, country. Hey, president of the world. Where are we going, women? Come on, let's do this. It's been an absolute delight having all of your company. And wherever you are in this amazing world, please make sure you have an absolutely fabulous day. I'm Jaynie Morris, and I look forward to having your company on the next episode of Women in Politics, Independence Day.